The stone walls of the assembly hall caught every syllable, amplifying the sound until it seemed to press against the very air. Paul stood at the center, his hands gripping the edges of the parchment so tightly his knuckles turned white. He did not look down. He looked directly at the men and women who had once turned their backs on him. "Cleanse yourselves," he commanded, his voice steady, cutting through the murmuring crowd, from every defilement of body and spirit. He paused. The silence that followed was thick, heavy with the weight of unspoken grievances. He let the words hang in the air, watching as the initial defiance in the room began to flicker and fade. Then, his posture shifted. The rigid authority in his shoulders softened. He took a step forward, his gaze searching the faces before him. "Make room for me," he said, his tone dropping into a register of quiet, raw vulnerability. "I have wronged no one. I have corrupted no one." He waited, his chest rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths. He was not asking for their pity. He was asking for the truth of their hearts. He turned away from the crowd, pacing the small space before the dais as if the memories were physical obstacles he had to navigate. The journey through Macedonia had been a gauntlet of relentless friction. He recounted the days spent in constant motion, the nights where sleep was a luxury he could not afford, and the crushing pressure of external conflicts that seemed to hunt him from city to city. His hands gestured to the air, tracing the shape of the exhaustion that had once defined his every step. It was not just the world outside that fought him. It was the internal shadow of fear that had haunted his path, whispering doubts into his resolve. He stopped his pacing and looked back at the assembly, his expression tightening. He spoke of the letter he had sent them, the one that had arrived like a blade. He admitted that, in the quiet hours after the courier had departed, he had felt the sting of regret. He had worried that his words were too sharp, that the weight of his rebuke had been more than they could bear. The memory of that uncertainty still lingered in his eyes. Paul stopped pacing. He looked toward the back of the hall, his eyes finding Titus standing by the heavy wooden door. The memory of that arrival hit him with the force of a physical blow. When Titus had first walked into his camp, the news he carried had been a jagged, uncertain thing. Paul remembered the exact moment the tension in his own shoulders finally snapped, the sudden rush of air returning to his lungs as he realized the letter had not destroyed them. He stood still, letting the memory settle over the room. He gestured toward Titus, acknowledging the messenger who had bridged the gap between his fears and their reality. Then, Paul turned his full attention back to the assembly. He watched them closely. He saw the way they held themselves now, no longer defensive, but waiting, their attention fixed on his next words. He could see the shift in the room, a collective stillness that signaled they were ready to hear what he had to say. He moved to the edge of the platform, his voice dropping to a lower, more deliberate pitch. He began to frame the distinction that had occupied his thoughts for weeks. He prepared to separate the heavy, stagnant weight of regret from the sharp, cleansing fire of change. He watched their faces, and he knew the time had come. Paul stepped forward, his hands sweeping low toward the floor. He spoke of worldly sorrow, describing it as a heavy, stagnant weight. It was a cycle of shame and fear, he explained, a pool of water that never moved and eventually turned to rot. It led only to death, keeping the heart trapped in the echoes of what had been done. He paused, letting the weight of those words hang in the air, then abruptly pointed upward. The atmosphere in the room shifted. He described godly sorrow as a sharp, cleansing fire. It was not a feeling that lingered in misery or self-pity. It was a catalyst for immediate action. He paced the platform, his eyes scanning the assembly as he began to list the evidence he saw in them now. He pointed to their newfound earnestness, their righteous indignation at their past choices, their deep fear of God, and their intense longing for justice. He watched as they nodded. The stagnant weight was gone, replaced by the heat of a fire. He saw their resolve hardening, and he knew the transformation was complete. Paul watched the assembly. The tension that had defined their earlier meetings had evaporated, replaced by a quiet, steady focus. He explained that this was not about condemnation, but about the work of restoration. The bridge between them, once fractured by doubt and distance, was being rebuilt stone by stone through their shared act of repentance. He saw the way they looked at him not as a judge, but as a partner in this ongoing path. A genuine warmth spread across his face, and he smiled. He reminded them that this journey was not a single step, but a continuous walk away from the shadows of regret and into the light of a renewed, purposeful life. As he finished, he stepped back from the edge of the platform. The room remained silent, a relationship finally restored.